Welcome to the Secure Connections podcast, brought to you by IOTSA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. I'm Brian Sherman, Content Director for IOTSA and host of the Secure Connections podcast. Joining me today is my special guest, who I haven't had on in a while, so we're happy that he's returned, Mike Semel, President of Semel Consulting. Mike is a well-known compliance expert with an extensive background in cybersecurity and the IT channel community, among many other things too. So welcome back to the Secure Connections podcast, Mike.
Oh, thank you, Brian. It's great to be here.
Well, good. So we haven't talked to you since, I believe, before the COVID-19 pandemic started. How are you and your family doing?
Good. Well, first of all, it probably hasn't been that long on the calendar, but it seems like years at this point, because I think this whole COVID situation is wearing on people and grating on all of us. The family's doing great. Thank you. We're laying low. We're doing the right things. My wife's mother is 91, so we're being really careful because we don't want to do anything to threaten her at all. And you know, it's tough doing a lot of FaceTime with people that I would really love to reach out and hug, but I know I can't do it at this moment.
Yeah, my mom just had her 90th birthday in June too, so yeah, we're very cautious. We're very cautious and want to keep them around. So how has your work situation changed over the past 4 months? I know you've been virtual most of the time I've known you, I believe.
I am virtual, and I've got a consulting business that doesn't have to be conducted in any one place. I can be anywhere to do it pretty much, but my business has changed. So I had an idea for developing training products for MSPs for the NIST cybersecurity framework and compliance, and everything kept getting pushed back because our consulting business was going so well. And then when COVID hit, everything kind of turned inside out. The consulting slowed down. That gave me an opportunity to work more on the development of the products, which we did. And we were able to bring all these products to market. And now Rapid Fire Tools actually has them on their order form. You can subscribe to our series of training systems. But the business, it was, I hate to say it, good timing for me to have the one part of the business slow down, the consulting business. We got the products to market. And now that the products are to market, the consulting business is starting to accelerate again. So thankfully, things have been good for us.
It's amazing how the transitions go, especially when you don't have all of that travel time. I know a number of people that are going crazy not traveling, but at the same point, when you realize how much time you recoup by not having to go wait at airports, fly to different places. I know we all miss it to a certain extent. I love to get out there, at least once a month or every other month. But yeah, it's amazing the things you can redo in your business when you've got time to focus.
Right. I was up to about 12,000 miles a month between our clients and going to events. And also I was on the IndyCar racing rescue team for 19 years.
That's right.
So I still get to about 8 races a year. And it was all adding up to about 12,000 miles a month, which obviously came to a screeching halt. And to your point, that's what gave me a lot of extra time to get things done.
Well, good. Now, because now you hope you can get that stuff done quickly so that eventually when you open up again, you can go do the stuff you enjoy doing in addition. Right. Not that you don't enjoy work, but you get my point, I think. Mm-hmm. So as a longtime industry expert, what are your thoughts on the current state of compliance and cybersecurity in the business community right now?
Well, I think it's pretty tough, and frankly, people have kind of forgotten about it because everybody's been in a mad scramble. First of all, in mid-March or, the beginning of March to mid-March, when everything shut down, it was almost like a building caught fire and people had to run out of it. So everybody was just getting things done, getting systems set up at home, getting users able to connect to the office and deliver their services. And of course, we didn't know then what we know now in terms of how long things were going to be and what it was going to turn into. So, there were things in cybersecurity that kind of were put on the back burner, and now some organizations are paying for it. They scrambled. And with compliance, there hasn't been a lot of enforcement, but that doesn't mean it's gone away. And we've seen things like ransomware dramatically increase and business email compromise, phishing scams dramatically increase with COVID, because people are disrupted. And if you get an email from your CEO that says transfer money, you can't just walk down the hall and say, is this for real? And we're still telling people now you got to, really be vigilant and not fall for those things. And then, keep doing the same things you're doing, even if you may be doing it through Zoom, like you and I are, with a visual connection or an electronic connection, a virtual connection. Don't let your guard down. The other part is compliance requires things like a risk analysis that is accurate and thorough. Well, your risk analysis in June or July of 2020 is not the same one you had in January because things have changed so much. So now there are things that still have to be done. Those are opportunities for managed service providers, but it's also a responsibility for the end user client to make sure that they are compliant. And if they have a breach or a ransomware attack, I heard yesterday about a healthcare organization that was fighting a ransomware attack. They're in upstate New York, and that means that it's a reportable breach, both under HIPAA and under the New York State SHIELD Act, even if they can recover. And the new ransomware is exporting the data out to the hackers. And what they're telling you is that even if you try to recover yourself and not pay the ransom, if that's the case, we're just going to release your information into the wild, and now you're going to have to go buy credit monitoring for all your patients and all that kind of stuff. So the hackers are just getting mean.
Yeah, it's the number of scams and schemes. You'd think it would be easier when everybody's locked down, but they're getting more creative every I hate to say month, but it seems like there's a new thing coming. The one thing you mentioned too is that validation point. I think we take for granted when everyone's in an office that you can run down the hall and check with an IT team or check with a manager or coworker if you've got a question about things. And when you don't have that validation or ease of validation in a remote workforce, people tend to wing it a little more often. And that's one thing I'm hearing back from MSPs is, you don't necessarily think of those issues. It's not written as a list as if this happens, then this will happen, but it's human nature. Being able to balance human nature in this scenario is something we didn't.
But you're also now balancing like canine nature because, your dog's barking and, there are other things we're dealing with these home distractions that we don't have at the office. And it's just kind of like you don't feel like you're at the office. So, the hackers are smart. I'm not saying they're good. I don't like them, but they're smart because they take advantage of this disruption and do things to make it seem like it's real. And we had a client of ours that told us they almost fell for one of the phishing attempts where somebody wanted them to transfer money, and they simply hit reply to the email they got from the CEO, and I put that CEO in quotes. And it wasn't from the CEO, but they hit reply and said, "Is this for real?" And the answer came back saying, "Yes, it's for real, and I really need this stuff right now. Quit asking questions and send it to me." Well, it wasn't from the CEO, but they were ready at the other end to reply to that.
Yeah, it's kind of scary. So obviously, there's a lot of benefits we're seeing to remote work. I think trust has been built with many companies that were skeptical before. We're seeing now that it's becoming more accepting, not in every case, but they realize, employees can actually get stuff done, especially if they have, some productivity tools in place to be able to measure that. And that concept's kind of increased during the pandemic. Risks are there as well. What are your key concerns about the work from home movement from a business perspective? You mentioned a couple of those, and I can even think, when you have parents teaching kids, I didn't have that problem. Thank goodness. I heard a lot of the horror stories, but distractions. There's so many distractions. What are some of the other concerns about moving people home to work?
Well, moving people home meant that a lot of data, if people had like on-premise servers and things like that, they moved to the cloud. We're seeing a big rush to getting things in the cloud and all that. But we're doing security scans right now, and we have been throughout the COVID situation, where we are catching home computers because they're connected to a network, they're connected through the VPN, or we're able to scan them using a small data collector tool. And what we're finding is that people are doing things, and these aren't like intentionally bad things, and people aren't trying to beat a system, but they just really haven't done some of this stuff before, and they're moving data files from, say, a server that they have access to, even if it's in the cloud or if they're remotely connecting to the office, and they want to put a shortcut on their desktop, but they don't know how to create a shortcut, so they just drag the file. And we're finding that on personal computers that are unencrypted, and in some cases Windows Home, because their companies allowed them to go home and just connect through like a web interface, but they're able to save files to their local computer. We have found data files that are regulated, like protected health information and social security numbers and things like that. I did a presentation for a client this morning and said, you've got these Windows Home machines on your network, and these people have saved protected health information on their desktops. And part of it is simple training. So if you drag a file from your server over to your desktop, it moves the file. If you want to put a shortcut, but leave the file in the same safe place on the server, you just right click, hit send to, and say send it to the desktop as a shortcut. People don't know that stuff. So we're having to go back and kind of go through even Windows basics to make sure some of this stuff isn't happening.
Sounds like a good training program for end users to go through some of the basics. So on the compliance perspective, you mentioned too, obviously there's huge risks involved. What is some of your advice as far as, work from home on compliance? Are there particular things MSPs should be focusing on that front?
Sure. I mean, I think it's the basics. And, I think of like a football training camp, and I don't care if you're an all-star and that you're the quarterback, you're Tom Brady, you still run through the tires and you still hit the tackling dummy and you still do some of the basic things. And it's more difficult because we're decentralized now, but it's still going back and making sure that you're looking at those systems. And now that, people are not in the office, you're probably not going to go to people's homes, but you want to at least educate them to make sure that that they log off when they walk away, because now it's pretty short leash in terms of having their kid, just a couple of feet from the computer and wanting to get on it and go surf the web. You don't want to do that on the business system, and you sure don't want to have a patient record if you're a law office. You don't want to have a client record or anything on that screen for somebody else to see. So we're working with people to educate them on the things to be aware of. And what we're saying is, there's no change in the rules. The change is now it's harder to apply and harder to manage because people are, working from their homes.
Yeah, mapping and figure out where all the information is a little more complicated now. That's the one thing that that is more challenging. So one of the things you sent me, actually just a couple days ago, was an interesting security-related article concerning an MSP and its Ohio-based business client. Can you give our listeners a quick summary of that situation?
Well, it's more than an article. It's a lawsuit.
Yeah.
And what happened was, and I've read the lawsuit, I have a copy of it, that an MSP called Involta, and I did not know Involta was an MSP. I've been to several of their data centers, I think in Akron, Ohio, and Tucson, Arizona, maybe other places, as part of our security assessments for clients, where we actually go on site, including to the data center to check out the security. And Involta evidently sells managed services. And they have a client named Boardman Molded Products in Ohio. And this is a manufacturing company. And according to the lawsuit, and this is all that I know, I haven't talked to anybody or interviewed anyone, but according to the lawsuit, Boardman fell for one of those email scams, and they transferred about $1.7 million in a phony invoice scam to hackers. And this happened a while ago. In January of this year, Boardman sued Involta and said, number one, that Involta should have warned them about ransomware and phishing attacks and helped them, because Involta in their marketing and in their contract said that they were going to handle the IT so that the client could focus on its business. That resonates, because I think at one point or another, I was an MSP and we told people those exact words. We're going to handle your IT so you can focus on your business. It's pretty scary to see that in a lawsuit, because the allegation is that they didn't live up to it. But there were some other things that were also in the lawsuit. They said that Boardman said that Involta had told them they were going to install antivirus software on all their computers, and it wasn't done. And also, that Involta had told Boardman that they were going to do QBRs, quarterly business reviews, as their MSP to go over their IT environment and deal with any issues and answer any questions and so forth. And the lawsuit claims that they never did that in 2018 or 2019. And in the lawsuit, it quotes what's in the contract, but also, and this is a big deal, it quotes what Involta had on its website and what they told their client. So I'm no longer an MSP. I'm in the consulting business now for cybersecurity and compliance. When we came up with our contract, and I had it reviewed just a couple of years ago by a contract attorney who was familiar with my business, knows our industry and everything, and he made some changes to the contract. But then he called me up and he said, hey, Mike, you got to go out to your website and change some of this marketing. And he was telling me that my contract said we weren't doing certain things. For example, we are not responsible for your compliance. You are. We're advisors and we're going to help you do things, but ultimately it's your responsibility. He said, go out to your website and you say we help our clients become compliant. And I go, well, we do. He goes, no. That means you're helping. You're hands-on. You're advising. So you need to change that. And there were other things too, where we had put in some protection in our contract, but our marketing was just a little bit too much. We're going to do everything for you. So we had to change it. I read the Involta lawsuit and said, wow, this is exactly what my lawyer was talking about. And now, there's some real basics here. Mm-hmm. And the basics are, it may be questionable whether or not a jury would believe that it was the MSP's responsibility to teach its client or teach the workforce members about cybersecurity, because that would imply that, you'd have to know every time they hired someone and brought somebody else on or whatever. And, we don't always have that relationship with our clients where we know that stuff. But when you get down to making a promise that you're going to install antivirus on everything, and I can go run a report and show you that it's not done, that means you're not doing what you promised. And if you said you're going to do QBRs, and the thing about it, I didn't see the contract, the underlying contract, but if you say you're going to be do QBRs, you might be able to get on the phone, you might be able to get on a Zoom meeting. It's very difficult to say what a QBR really is and what you're going to include in it and what you're going to say. But if you don't do it, it's real black and white. You promised to do something and you never did it. If they went and spent 5 minutes a month with the client saying, this is your quarterly business review, not a month, but every quarter, this is your quarterly business review, and we found no problems with your network. You have anything that you're planning to do that we should know about. That's a 5-minute quarterly business review. But they didn't do it. And if they didn't do it, as the lawsuit alleges, there's no defense. So my recommendations for an MSP, because I did this, number one, you never set foot out of your office. You never do anything, whether it's a free assessment to try to get somebody's business or even a break-fix service call, without having somebody sign something that limits your exposure and limits your liability. Limiting your exposure says, here's what's included in our services and here's what isn't. So that way you can limit what the expectation is. And we had problems, and I know MSPs have had problems, where clients kind of assumed, well, it's all you can eat. And the MSP says, no, if you're doing this, or this, I'm going to bill you separately. So we had those disputes, but it just told us more of what we should put in our contract. Limiting liability means that even if you do screw up, so let's say, you're guaranteeing you're going to back up their data, and you're backing it up every day, and then you go to restore it and something happened to the backup system and you couldn't. That's where you want to limit your liability. So when you do have a problem, you don't want it to put you out of business and you lose your house, you lose your car, and you lose your retirement. So limiting your liability is putting a limitation in the contract. And we had a limitation that said, if we fail to deliver on our things, the limit of our liability is 1 month's managed services fee. So if it was a $2,000 a month client, that was the limit of our liability. And then the last thing you do is buy insurance. because there you can offset the liability. So at that point, the insurance company can pay your lawyer and pay the claim, with one exception. And that is, in our policy and in all the policies that I've ever bought, there's an exclusion that says if you are falsely advertising what you're delivering, we're not going to cover you. And there's another exclusion that says if you're not delivering services at a professional level, we're not going to cover you. So if you look at the Involta lawsuit,
which may be a factor here, obviously,
the allegation is you didn't, I think every MSP that's listening to us would agree that installing antivirus is the professional standard. And also, I think you'd all agree that if you say you're going to do QBRs, you're setting a professional standard. That's a standard in our industry. If you don't do those things, your insurance company may not be there for you.
Yeah. And to be honest, that's what the lawsuit is alleging, even though, nothing has been proven at this point. But if that's a situation that does happen and tends to be true, then yeah, there are serious concerns. Wait, Mike, let's take a step back. What type of attack would you consider this? Because I kind of got, when I read through the lawsuit, and I did take a look at it, and the article was a business email compromise. Would you say that's specific? Because they generated invoices and sent those through the right channels. The thing that concerns me more, which is kind of a liability on the actual client side, is they didn't notice it until they ran out of money in the check. It seemed like, according to what I read in the article, literally they drained the entire bank account of 1.7 million. They would have had more if there was more money in there. It's like nobody was watching the bank account either, which is surprising.
Right. And, you're absolutely right. It was a business email compromise. And again, that's the email that comes, quote unquote, from the CEO. And what's happened, though, with these emails is that if you hit reply on that email, it's going to the hackers. The reply is going to the hackers. You think it's going to the CEO, and the CEO comes back and says, yes, go ahead and do this.
So it looks legitimate, right?
Yeah, we talked about this with a client the other day, and the client had told me that he owns a Corvette, and he actually showed me a picture of it on Facebook when I was there. And we were doing an update of their risk assessment, and we were talking about this business email compromise. And I said, hey, Tom, you still own that Corvette? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, this would be like an email to your office manager. Her name's Christy, that said, hey, I was out on my Corvette over the weekend and I forgot to call you to tell you that we're buying this new doctor's practice and I need you to transfer 50 grand into this bank account. And the way the hackers do these things is that they use a lot of social engineering. So they'd look at his Facebook account and they would see that he's got a Corvette. So they could just weave that kind of into the conversation to build Christie's confidence that it really is coming from Tom. And this is how these people work. They're absolute experts at it. And they only really have to be right, once, when we have to be right all the time trying to block it.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a lot of money at stake, as you can see. So they're willing to invest a little more time and a little more effort in doing these things, as opposed to the general just blasting out ransomware everywhere and hoping you snag somebody. In this case, it's very targeted.
Right. And if you're the MSP, what we used to have in our contracts when I was an MSP, and we still have in my consulting company contracts, is here's what our responsibilities are, here's what our deliverables are. Here are what your responsibilities are. And we have the client sign that. And their responsibilities include informing us when they hire someone so that they can get access to the training and we can put them on the network, and that they don't tell the person, like, go use the old, the former person's account to get into our system, which we've seen in the past, but also that they have to notify us within 24 hours of a termination so that we can, take away the person's access and things like that. So you have to be careful. You don't assume these things, because you don't want to end up in court after somebody's lost $1.7 million trying to figure out who's to blame. You're much better off avoiding that to start with.
Sure. So if these allegations were true that were alleged in here, what do you think What's one thing that they should have done differently to mitigate the security breach? Let's start at the beginning, not all of the things that they may have failed to do, but to prevent the security breach, what's the one thing that they could have done or should have done?
Well, look, people are the last line of defense. So it's not technology that you're throwing at this exclusively. You have to train people to do what I told you we just had a discussion with our client about, which is if you get that request where it's any request for a transfer of money. And by the way, we've gone to CEOs and business owners and doctors that own medical practices and explain what this situation is. And to a person, we ask the same question. Would you have any problem having somebody delay a response to your legitimate request if it meant that they didn't send the money out to a hacker or to a criminal or send sensitive information out? And even though it may delay it, would you care? Not one business leader has said, no, I just want them to send it. So slow things down. And this is training. So training isn't just training the end user, the clerk or the person in payables to do the right thing. It's also training the CEO that if they make a request, that they should really do it in person or expect their person not to fulfill it until they validate it in person with them. So you got to train kind of both ends, because you don't want the CEO to go fire somebody for not responding fast enough to a legitimate request. You want them to slow things down and say, I'll accept that delay in order to make sure the scam doesn't happen. So I think training is absolutely key. And if you're an MSP, you realize that all the services you're performing are not, hands-on technical services, because you have to protect that human, and you have to look at even things like the physical environment to make sure that there's total security. Putting the best security on something doesn't mean anything when someone writes their login and password on a Post-it note.
Yeah. So putting my lawyer hat on here, if I was the MSP's attorney, I could basically turn back to say it was a failure on the client's side if they had provided and made recommendations, for example, on training that was disregarded and other issues. And maybe some of the side issues that were mentioned in there are not accurate, for all we know, because it's a lawsuit. They throw the kitchen sink in there. For all we know, the biggest risk could have actually been a failure on the company's part, trying to recruit from the MSP. So I guess to think about that, I'm being the attorney for the MSP here.
Right. But now if I'm the attorney for the other side, let's assume you're right.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a question on that. Then what do? You go and you yell louder about, you guys didn't have antivirus on all those computers. You said you were doing these QBRs. You never did them. Can you show us the dates and times you did the QBRs? And what you're trying to do is discredit the person. So I think
but if they have the documentation to show they actually did that, this lawsuit could be a complete failure on their part.
It could be, but let's talk about that for just a second, Brian.
Sure.
We work with clients on their compliance. And when we talk about compliance, or when most people talk about compliance, they're thinking about HIPAA or some federal regulation or state law or something like that. My definition of compliance is anything someone else makes you do. If you drive a car and you have to have it inspected, that's compliance. If you're on the road, you have to drive between the lines and close enough to the speed limit so you don't get arrested. You have to stop at stop signs so you don't get arrested or you don't get killed. So these are all just compliance things. In the IT world, when it comes to compliance, it's not security. People mistake compliance for security all the time. Security is protecting data. So protecting data, and we've got all these great tools to do it. It's real basic fundamentals like patches and updates and antivirus software. But security now gets into things like DNS protection and higher level mail filtering and security operations centers and SIM systems and all this stuff. That's to protect data. It doesn't mean you're compliant. Compliance means doing security in a way that aligns with a regulation or a requirement, but it also means you better have the documentation. And the documentation is what's required if you're audited, you're investigated, or you're sued. So when it comes to documentation, that's where people fall off. So let's look at this lawsuit. And let's say that the plaintiff, which is the company that's suing their MSP, has a report that shows they're missing antivirus on 4 machines out of 10 or 4 machines out of 100. Okay, now if the contract says you're installing antivirus on all the machines, that's evidence that it's not happening.
Right.
What do you have as an MSP to go prove you are doing the right thing? Show me your report, because it's written evidence that they're looking for on the QBRs. If you said you did QBRs, how do you prove it? Do you have the report? Do you have a written report? Even if it's 1-page summary, do you have a written report that's dated and time-stamped? And do you have like a ticket that says you went to the client site or you went online with them now during COVID with a Zoom meeting to do your QBR? Is there some sort of a record that that occurred? Or even in Outlook, do you have a calendar entry where you invited the client to the QBR? So it's not a question of did you do this stuff,
or something in your
do
CRM
you
system.
have the evidence to
Right.
prove you did it.
Right. Or the reports from a CRM or other things that you're tracking. No, that makes perfect sense. And I would assume the same thing with like employee training, to be able to show which employees have taken what training and to go back to whatever service they're using to have that information. But and the other part you mentioned is looking at their website, looking at their contracts, although we haven't seen those, is did they have a qualified IT knowledgeable attorney help them craft the documents and look at their website and other stuff too? Is probably a good takeaway from this.
Well, it is, but there's one other thing too, and that is that we've seen contracts. I'm working with a client right now who has signed contracts that have cybersecurity requirements in them, and their people didn't know about them. And I say their people, like their IT department, didn't know about it. Why? Because 2 lawyers negotiated the contract for these organizations. And they went back and forth. Nobody was really paying attention to the cybersecurity clause. They're lawyers. You know, they go to college to learn how to argue with each other, and it's just what they do. If a lawyer's arguing with you, he's not mad at you. It's just, you know, his nature, like a dog barking. So what happens is that, and we've seen this, we've worked with clients and absolutely shocked them right out of their shoes that they were not compliant with a contract. And we've asked them, do you have a contract with so-and-so? Because we know that certain organizations have put cybersecurity requirements in. And we recently took on a law firm that works with insurance companies. And we asked the law firm, have you signed any contracts with cybersecurity requirements? They sent us 7 contracts. Guess what? Their IT department had never seen the contracts. So we're now showing the IT department. Somebody once said that a consultant is somebody that looks at your watch and tells you what time it is. We're now showing them, their IT people, the requirements that they signed in a contract and stuck in a folder. And until we asked to see any of their contracts, and we told them, you know, we're going to help you comply with the laws you have to comply with and with the industry regulations. So attorneys have ethical requirements for confidentiality, but you need to show us the contracts. We can't see those unless you show them to us. And also your application for cyber insurance. We want to see what you answered on that. So we took all those things, put them together, and now we've got a list of about 50 items that they have to do to comply with these contracts. Some of them are general. You got to protect data. Others are specific. You must install all critical updates within 30 days of the release. Some of them say if you have an incident, you have to inform us of the incident. But some of the other ones say you have to inform us within 24 hours. They didn't know this stuff. The IT department didn't know this stuff. We're having a call with them to go through that list one by one and show them what their new security program is going to look like.
Nice. So watch the fine details.
Well, don't sign something and file it away, because it may get pulled out the day they're going to sue you.
That makes sense, because I guess you don't think about that as like we have good contracts, but is everybody aware of what they say and what the processes and the requirements are within those contracts,
Right.
especially the SL. Yeah, I've heard those conversations a lot. So, well, Mike, it's always great having you here today. Unfortunately, we're running out of time very quickly. So, any final thoughts on this topic or any other topics related to compliance or security before we sign off?
No, I just think that right now everybody's uncertain and worried, and depending on who you're working with, you may have clients that are, in good shape, other clients that are hurting. But this is going to be a big opportunity right now for MSPs to do things. And my feeling, and I've gone through this with 9/11 and Y2K and a lot of other things that were crises, that the more I was positioned to be seen as an authority, and particularly on security and compliance, which I've done for the last 17 years. Now it seems like these things are kind of getting popular, but if you're seen as an authority, people will spend more to do business with you and seek you out, and you won't be vulnerable to people that are just trying to cut costs.
Excellent advice, as always. On behalf of IOTA, a big thank you to Mike Semel of Semel Consulting for joining me for this episode of the Secure Connections podcast. Be sure to visit iota.com every week for the latest episode and to check out all of our MSP-oriented cybersecurity and IoT business resources. I wish you all a safe and secure day, and thank you for joining us.
Stay safe, everyone.